Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are going to be starting a brand new chapter in the study, and so we're going to talk about it for a second. I hold unconventional beliefs. This Bible study is not for everyone. What I talk about here is what is actually written in these words, and it is not what most people believe. I do not read the book as though I have the lens on of either there is a promised people, a chosen group of people who have to inherit the land, and through them all redemption comes. And I don't read it as though Jesus was the redemption that had to come. I know that that steps on a lot of toes, so I let people know straight off the top that's where I'm at. And so now we will be getting into Judges.
The book of Judges is interesting because we are no longer focusing on the one single hero, right? Prior to this, it has been the one single hero for the group of people who are being risen up. Prior to this, we've had Moses, and he led people to victories where they took part of the land. And then we had Joshua, and Joshua took people and brought victory to the land. Let's look at the land real quick. We're not going to get into Google Earth. We're going to look at uh, this was the pre-conquest in Joshua land of Canaan. I guess is the best because they have the most. First, they came and they did not take the Moabites here, but they took the Ammonites here, and they took up this area over here. Now they have gone in and they have taken most of this area. We're going to look at this map. This is the area occupied by Israel after the conquest of Joshua, as recorded. But we also know that they had the entire land of Bashan that was laid out to us, right? Up to the land of Makkah. So this should extend a little bit farther up on this map, in my opinion, but it's whatever. I'm not by any means like the geographic expert on this. But this is a good visualization of what is left. Now, we have been told that they have fulfilled the promise given to Israel by God by occupying this land right here. When we left Joshua, well, right before we left Joshua, we saw that they had fulfilled the promise given by God to occupy the land. The land had been divided, and they had driven out all of the people. And then by the end of Joshua, we find out that okay, so it wasn't quite fulfilled all the way. There's still a little bit left to do, but we're going to call it fulfilled. And then we still have a few people left to drive out, but it's more than a few left to go, right? I mean, out of the 28 million, there's still quite a few left to go, maybe half or so. But that's not what we were told in Joshua. So now we're going to go into the text. We're going to look into Judges, right? Let's go ahead and start reading how the conquest of Canaan proceeds. After the death of Yeshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, "Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?" "Judah shall go up," answered the Lord. "Indeed, I delivered the land into their hands." Let's look at the lands of the tribes. Okay, so this is the land of Israel. They don't quite have possession of the coast yet, right? Now, it depends on how you look at it, because according to the book of Joshua, they do have possession of the coast. There are pockets along the coast that they don't have. This map that I have, I don't know its veracity. It's just a good way to visualize. And so this may be where they actually are at according to the book of Joshua, which is what it claims. And if so, there are pockets inside of these places of the people who were there before living as before. Judah is the land of Hebron, eastward or westward towards the ocean, to the land of the Philistines, to the land of the Anakim that are still there. Simeon is encapsulated within Judah, But Judah is going to go first to conquer, right? To go forth. Judah shall go up, answer the Lord, I have delivered the land into their hands. And then the men of Judah said to their brothers the Simeonites, come up with us to our allotted territory, and let us fight against the Canaanites. We likewise will go with you to your territory. So the Simeonites went with them. And when Judah attacked, the Lord delivered the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands. And they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. And there they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, striking down the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And as Adoni-Bezek fled, they pursued him, seized him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. And then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have gathered the scraps under my table. As I have done to them, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, where he died. Now, let's look at this particular stuff, right? Because we're talking about the Canaanites and Perizzites, and where were they prior to? Well, they were up here, right? They were on the northern edge. And if we're looking at the 12 tribes, that is inside the land of Manasseh. That is not inside the land of Judah, right? If Judah was going to war, they're not to make war with Edom or Moab. They're supposed to take over this land this way. So why wouldn't you go for this land in the Philistia, right? Well, there's other reasons why, but mainly because there's giants in this land. Right? This is where Goliath and his brothers come from. And so they're not going to the land of Judah to take over and help expunge Judah. They're going to the land of Manasseh, the second half of the tribe, the ones that got their land the second, to help them firm up their go there. So that would be in this area up here in the Harod Valley. They don't have on this map particularly marked, and I didn't go and look it up, but this is the area that we're talking about. As Adoni-Bezek fled, they pursued him and seized him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Now, there are things that we need to pay attention to here. And the common view is, and rightly so, because it says it right here, is that this guy cut off other people's thumbs and toes, right? He conquered kings, cut off their thumbs and toes, and made them do service to him that way. They gathered the scraps under his table. He made them foot servants to him to clean and eat the scraps that he dropped from the table. And so that's what gets done to him. And that's a thing. But remember back in Exodus when we talked about covenants and how you get the covenant and where the covenant is signed at? Do you remember back in Exodus when we talked about toes, ears, and thumbs, right? And blood covenants. That's part of this too. And then the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. Afterward, the men of Judah marched down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, in the Negev, and in the foothills. Now this is Judah's land, right? So they do what they do up here, and then they turn around. The Negev is way down here. And so they start running people out of the Negev in the foot country. All right, so Judah also marched against the Canaanites who were living in Hebron, formerly known as Kiriath Arba, and they struck down Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. If you ever wondered about the names of some of the Anakim, they might be recorded. And from there they marched against the inhabitants of Debir, formerly known as Kiriath Sepher. And it's also important to note that Hebron was given to Caleb, who is about to make his appearance right here, right? But in Joshua, he took possession of Hebron in Joshua. And so now they go to Hebron and clear the surroundings, but it tells us that they actually take the city too. And from there they marched against the inhabitants of Debir, which is just south of Hebron, formerly known as Kiriath Sepher, And Caleb said to the man who and Caleb said, to the man who strikes down Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give my daughter Asa in marriage. So Othniel, son of Caleb's younger brother Kenaz, captured the city, and Caleb gave his daughter Asa to him in marriage. And then one day Asa came to Othniel and urged him to ask her father for a field. And when she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what do you desire? Give me a blessing, she answered, since you have given me land in the Negev. Give me springs of water as well. And so Caleb gave her both the upper and lower springs. There are many instances that we see in this book of the writers of this book verifying the information they're giving you with knowledge that is commonly known. Right? Genesis and Exodus are basically an amalgamation of local creation and the narrative of living stories. They're codified. They're put down in writing so that people can believe this thing and therefore set themselves apart. But there are things included in there that were like this. That's just put in there because the people who had knowledge of the time know this story. And because it is a well-known story, it's included so that it adds veracity to the overall narrative, right? Because people in the area know that this particular thing happened, that Caleb's daughter was given to Othniel for winning this battle. And they know that Othniel asked for a field, and they know that Asa got the 2 springs. That's the only reason that's in here. There's no reason to include this story in a narrative other than to help support your narrative. Everybody knows this story, and if it's included, well, of course the story must be right by association. Now, the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up to the men of Judah from the city of Palms, which is Jericho, to the wilderness of Judah in the Negev near Arad. They went to live among the people. Then the men of Judah went to their brothers the Simeonites, attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and devoted the city to destruction. And so it was called Hormah. And here we have a slight problem. I don't know if they have Hormah. I don't know if Hormah is labeled on any of these. But it's not that important. You can't really read that one anyway. What is important is the fact that Hormah gets named right here in the book of Judges. And if it gets named right here in the book of Judges, then how does it have a name that is the same in Deuteronomy? And how does it have a name that is the same in Numbers? Because it didn't get named until after Numbers and Deuteronomy were already recorded. They were already recording those things, and this stuff was already recorded then. It's a consistency error. It's a minor one. It's not that big of a deal. It's really not. In the long scope of things, in the consistency errors that we have found, this is one of the minor ones, but it's still one. It is still a consistency error in an infallible argument. I'm going to poke holes in the infallible argument every time I see one, because it is not real. It is a fallible document. Men wrote the document with a purpose. You can argue that the purpose was good. I will. But it was written with a purpose. God himself did not write this book. It was written by men. And just as Moses had promised, Judah gave Hebron to Caleb, who drove out the descendants of the 3 sons of Anak. And guess what? Here we have another consistency error, because Judah didn't give Hebron to Caleb. Joshua did. Yeshua gave Caleb Hebron. But now it's Judah. Consistency. The Benjamites, however, failed to drive out the Jebusites living in Jerusalem. So, to this day, the Jebusites lived there among the Benjamites. And the house of Joseph also attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them, and they sent spies to Bethel, formerly known as Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to him, "Please show us how to get into the city, and we will treat you kindly." And so the man showed them the entrance to the city, and they put the city to the sword, but released that man and all his family. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. Interesting. That's an interesting story right there. Y'all see this, right? Like the Benjamites, let's look at the Benjamites. Where are they located? That's the wrong slide. The Benjamites are right here. They are on the north side of Judah. I believe they have Jerusalem as part of Benjamin, but they edge up on Dan and Ephraim, right? And so that is going to put them, this is Hebron, which is the north side of Judah. Benjamin is going to be right here, so we're talking about fighting probably right here. There's Jebus or Jerusalem and Yarmouth right there. So, but this moving of Luz, that's funny. Like, where is Bethel? That's Beth Sheran. Bethel is just, it's around Jerusalem. We don't have it labeled either. I'm slacking today, y'all. I'm sorry, but they attack Bethel. They first send spies to Bethel, and the spies catch a man coming out of the city. And they're like, "Hey, if you show us how to get in, we ain't gonna kill you. We're gonna let you go. We'll let you and your whole family go. But first you're gonna show us how to get up in here." And so they sneak in, as is their custom, and destroy everyone. They put everyone to the sword after sneaking in the middle of the night. Once again, this is a repeated pattern, right? This is consistency. This is what they do, right? They're not about meeting on a fair field of battle at all. Don't get that in your mind, right? So, but he moves to the land of the Hittites and builds a city there. And let's see where. Well, that's not very far at all. Unless you're talking about these Hittites way up here. Is that what you're saying? They went from here with these Hittites to there with those Hittites. That kind of makes sense. Go find your cousins up there. This ain't the place for you no more. At that time, Manasseh failed to drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean, Tanakh, Dor, Iblim, Megiddo, and their villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. And when Israel became stronger, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but they never drove them out completely. And Ephraim also failed to drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, so the Canaanites continued to dwell among them in Gezer. Zebulun failed to drive out the inhabitants of Kitron and Nahol, so the Canaanites lived among them and served as forced laborers. Asher failed to drive out the inhabitants of Akko, Sidon, Alab, Akzib, Helbah, Aphik, and Rehob, so the Asherites lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land, because they did not drive them out of it. Naphtali failed to drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anan, so the Naphtalites also lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. But the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anan served them as forced laborers. The Amorites forced the Danites into the hill country and did not allow them to come down into the plain, as the Amorites were determined to dwell in the Mount Heres, Aijalon, and Shalabim. But when the house of Joseph grew in strength, they pressed the Amorites into forced labor, and the border of the Amorites extended from the ascent of Akrabim to Selah and beyond. There's a repeating theme right here, right? It is important to note that at this point, probably solely in the whole history of the nation, they are actually doing what God has called them to do. Right? Whether or not you agree with that call, right? We went over that, and I don't necessarily agree with the call, but they do. And they are now, for the first time, actually doing what they are called to do. And it is failure after failure after failure after failure after failure. But there's a bright side to it. They fail to drive out these people who God has promised to drive out before them, but they take them as slaves, forced labor, right? They enslave the native people whom they cannot drive out of their own land. Now, the argument is that this land was promised. Okay, some guy wandered through and coveted it and thinks that God said that this is your land. That's the story of Abram. What happens is they kill everyone they possibly can. And then the ones that they can't, they force into forced labor. Now, why couldn't they, instead of forcing them into labor, take them out? Because they lost heart in the destruction, most likely, because it is a hard thing to just put people to the sword. Hey, if you've never been in this situation, let me assure you, it is not an easy situation to be in. And the more you're in the situation, the less you want to be in that situation. And so I can imagine that it got a little bit disheartening doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over 14 million times. Israel rebuked at Bochim. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land that I had promised to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you are not to make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall tear down their altars. Yet you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I tell you that I will not drive out these people before you. They will be thorns in your side, and their gods will be a snare to you. And when the angel of the Lord had spoken these words to all the Israelites, the people lifted up their voices and wept. So they called that place Bochim, and offered sacrifices there to the Lord. Now, where did this angel come from? He didn't descend from heaven. Remember back in Joshua, this guy came out of nowhere with an upraised sword, and they're like, whose side are you on? And he's like, I'm the commander of the Lord's armies. That's this guy. He has been directing the bloodbath that has been going on, and this is the guy who is now upset because they did not put these people to the sword. That is what is happening right here. This angel of the Lord comes out and he is mad, and he says, I brought you out of Egypt and led you to the land that I had promised to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you are not to make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall tear down their altars. And he is mad that these people right here are not dead. He is very much upset that the people who were already living in the land and knew the people who were in the land before them are now dead. This guy who came in with this unknown technology and was able to perform miracles and help with and direct Moses in the correct usage of things and to correct Joshua in the correct usage of things. This guy is mad because y'all did not finish the job. And he comes from where? From the mountain of foreskins, where the new covenant was written in blood, where the people who left Egypt who were not circumcised became that way. This was the founding. That was the founding, Gilgal. And where does he reside? He resides in Gilgal. After Yeshua had dismissed the people, the Israelites went out to take possession of the land, each to his own inheritance. And the people served the Lord throughout the days of Yeshua and of the elders who outlived him, who had seen all the great works of the Lord had done for Israel. And Yeshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. After that, the whole generation had also been gathered to their fathers. Another generation rose up who did not know the Lord or the works that he had done for Israel. And the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. Well, that's a quick turnaround, right? After that whole generation had also been gathered to their fathers. So everybody from Joshua's generation, all the hard men who made for soft times, all of them passed away. And then the soft men who make for soft times show up. And here we have them, right? And they do evil in the sight of the Lord within one generation of taking the land. Could you imagine? Can you imagine, right? Let's put it into context. Let's say that there was a revolution. Let's give it a year, starting in 1776 or so. Let's do that. And let's say that 1 year, one generation after that, the entire country falls into disarray and falls off from all of the ideals held. Now, we've fallen off from the ideals held, but it has taken more than a generation. This is the people who are the direct descendants of the people who witnessed all the miracles of God. They have heard directly from the lips of the witnesses the miracles of God. And the first thing they do is turn away. It's just interesting how it works. And thus they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they followed after various gods of the people around them. They bowed down to them and provoked the Lord to anger, for they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreth. And then the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he delivered them into the hand of those who plundered them. He sold them into the hand of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. And wherever Israel marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them to bring calamity, just as he had sworn to them. And so they were greatly distressed. And so begins a pattern. One of the things I do is I'm a pattern recognition guy, right? I am really good at recognizing patterns. And the pattern that I'm recognizing here is it's not even that hard to see. Whenever things go well, it is because they serve God. And whenever things do not go well, it is because they turn from God. Whether or not that is true. It is very easy to write that afterwards. I know that in particular just stepped on somebody's toes, but it's the truth. Men have not changed since men were born. Since the very first ones trod the earth, men have had the same desires. Now, our capacity for understanding has grown significantly. We could not go back to this time and accurately portray electricity or combustion, like combustion as transportation. They couldn't conceive of that. So this is giving you an excuse for when things go bad. That is not to say that there is not a reason for things to go bad, right? But this is giving God an out. When we saw these failures here, that is not because they were not being faithful in anything other than refusing to destroy. The promise of Exodus was that they would not have to destroy. The promise of Exodus was that the fear of God would drive them out before them. Not that they would be required to put 28 million to the sword. That was not the promise. They were promised they would be walking in because of the miracles shown by this angel. Because of those miracles, the people would flee. And they would just walk in and take possession. And so they didn't have the heart to finish what God promised to do for them. And then the Lord raised up judges who saved them from the hands of those who plundered them. Israel, however, did not listen to their judges. Instead, they prostituted themselves with other gods and bowed down to them. They quickly turned from the way of their fathers who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commandments. They did not do as their fathers had done. And whenever the Lord raised up a judge for the Israelites, he was with that judge and saved them from the hands of their enemies, while the judge was still alive. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning under those who oppressed them and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the Israelites became even more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They would not give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he said, "Because this nation has transgressed the covenant I laid down for their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Yeshua left when he died. And in this way I will test whether Israel will keep the way of the Lord by walking in it as their fathers did." And that is why the Lord has left those nations in place and has not driven them out immediately by delivering them into the hands of Joshua. See, it's easily explained. It's not my fault, it's yours. If only you had not made me act this way. If only you had done the thing I asked you to do. How hard is it really? You were halfway there. It's only 14 million people. Surely you can finish the task. Surely you don't mind doing the other half of the task that I said I would do for you. I know, I got distracted and I said I would do it, but you can do it. Why don't you do it? You can do it. As a matter of fact, you should have done it. It's not my fault, it's your fault. The nations left to test Israel. These are the nations that the Lord left to test all the Israelites who had not known any of the wars of Canaan. If only to teach warfare to the subsequent generations of Israel, especially to those who had not known it formerly. Because you're going to rest in your land, and you're going to know peace, and you're going to eat from the fat of the land in these orchards you did not plant, and harvest these fields that you did not sow. The 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites who lived in the mountains of Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermoth to Lebo Hamath. These nations were left to test the Israelites, to find out whether they would keep the commandments of the Lord, which he had given their fathers through Moses. Thus the Israelites continued to live among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 of the 7. 6 of the 7 that were promised to be run out are still there. Well, imagine that. God did not keep his promise. But it's your fault. You did it. It wasn't him. Like, I know he promised that he would drive them out before you, that they would flee in fear. As soon as you showed up, they would see the might of God Almighty and tremble and quake and run. That was the promise. The promise was that God himself would open up the ground and swallow those who stood against him, that he would burn them. That was the promise. These miracles by which I led you out are the things I will do to secure your lands. And the people will let you have it because of these things. That was God's promise. Not that they would have to go in and do this. It's important to hammer that home. I know it can be overbearing the way I'm doing it. I'm sorry, but it's important to hammer that home. 6 out of the 7 peoples. He said, I'm going to run these 7 peoples out, and you are going to take complete possession of this land. And then in Joshua, we hear he took complete possession of this part of the land. And here we hear that they did not. 6 out of the 7. And so the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and Asherahs. And then the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim, and the Israelites served him 8 years. I'm not going to bother looking that up. And then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he raised up Othniel, son of Caleb's younger brother Kenaz, as a deliverer to save them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he became Israel's judge and went out to war. And the Lord delivered Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hand of Othniel, who prevailed against him. So the land had rest for 40 years, until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. And then once again the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. So he gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And after enlisting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join forces with him, Eglon attacked and defeated Israel, taking possession of the city of Palms, or Jericho. And the Israelites served Eglon, king of Moab, 18 years. And again they cried out to the Lord, and he raised up Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed Benjamite, as their deliverer. And so they sent him with a tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Shout out to my lefties. Now, Ehud had made for himself a double-edged sword, a cubit long, and he strapped it to his right thigh under his cloak. Now, a cubit, if you remember, is the length of an arm. It can vary from the wrist to the fingertip depending on the time period, but roughly the length of an arm is roughly 3 feet. This is a long sword. He strapped it to his right thigh under his cloak and brought the tribute to the Eglon, king of Moab. Now, there is a 0% chance that that was sneaky. There is no way you are hiding a cubit-long sword. Now, unless you're talking about the foot-long cubit, and then you could hide that, right? And maybe. But most of the time, the cubit is close to a yard, right? It's almost 3 feet. And so strapping it to the thigh under his cloak, it's got to be a long dagger. So maybe we're talking about a foot long, right? And that's a whole different thing. But it's a double-edged sword, so it's obviously made for joogie, not slicey. After Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, Ehud made this, he strapped it to his thigh under his cloak, and he brought tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was an obese man. And after Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he ushered out those who had carried it. But upon reaching the idols near Gilgal, he turned back and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. Silence, said the king, and all his attendants left him. And then Ehud approached him while he was sitting alone in the coolness of his upper room in Gilgal. And I have a word from God for you, said Ehud said. And the king rose from his seat. And Ehud reached with his left hand and pulled the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into Eglon's belly. And the handle sank in after the blade, and the fat closed in over it, so that he couldn't take the sword out from his belly, and his bowels emptied. And then Ehud went out through the porch and closed the door and locked it behind himself, right? Closing and locking the doors to the upper room. And after Ehud was gone, Eglon's servants came in, and they found the doors to the upper room locked. He must be relieving himself in the cool room, they said. And so they waited until they became worried and saw that he had still not opened the doors to the upper room. So then they took the key and opened the doors, and there was their lord lying dead on the floor. Ehud, however, had escaped while the servants waited, and he passed by the idols and escaped to Syria. On arriving in Syria, he blew the ram's horn throughout the country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came down with him from the hills, and he became the leader. Follow me, he told them, for the Lord has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And they followed him down and seized the fords of Jericho, leading to Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross over. At that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all robust and valiant men. Not one of them escaped. And so Moab was subdued under the hand of Israel that day, and the land had rest for 80 years. And after Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath, and he too saved Israel, striking down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Now this is an interesting set of stories because this is the power of the individual actor. This is the Spirit of Christ. And I know that that just stepped on a whole brand new set of toes, because what is happening here is the singular actor. This is very much what Israel was looking for in a Messiah. Now, we can argue about whether or not Jesus was the Messiah, but regardless of that, what Israel is looking for is laid out right here. They are looking for, in their time of distress, a singular actor to rise up and take action in a heroic manner to do the thing which saves the nation. We can argue about motivations. We have seen a repeated pattern of how this comes about, right? It is not that they go and valiantly fight on the field of combat. It is that they go and through singular combat, most of the time in a not so honorable fashion, we'll say, they take action. Othniel's brother, where was the actual saving? They served Eglon for 18 years, and he made himself the sword, right? And he goes up and he first, he hides the sword, and then he brings forth the tribute, saying that I am serving you. This is what I owe you as your servant. And then he presents that, and then he tricks the man into thinking that he's nice, like he's on his side. And then he stabs him with a sword and rams it into him. It can't be 3 foot because otherwise it would stick out his back, right? And it gets trapped in his gut, and it's held there by his gut, and he can't pull it out because of the fat. And he runs into the room and locks himself into the room. And that's an interesting story by itself, right? Because why would you not immediately start crying out for your servants who are outside of the doors, the other direction, or run in that direction if you're able to run with a sword in your guts? But he evacuates his bowels and he dies. And then the repeated pattern is this single actor coming forth to save them. That is what they were expecting. in a physical manner with the Messiah. We will save the Deborah because of the Song of Deborah until the next one. So that's where we're going to wrap this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. I understand that I hold unconventional beliefs and that my beliefs step on toes. I do not do this to step on toes, but there are a lot of toes that need to be stepped on. The only sacrifice that was ever required for the forgiveness of your sins was your sins. You need to sacrifice your sins to God. You need to turn those over to Him for Him to take those away from you. But there was never a blood sacrifice required. So all of that is negated. God promised Moses that he would lead these people out of Egypt and into a promised land where people would flee from them. That was the promise that Moses conveyed to the people. And that is not what happened. The promise of God was not fulfilled. And you can talk about the delayed fulfillment, that eventually they get the land. They don't get the whole land until David. And that is a long ways away. God can't break his promise. Like, that's one of the things, right? God can't break his promise. He cannot act contrary to his nature. He told you to go forth, be fruitful and multiply, and shed no blood of man. And yet, when he promises to drive the people out before you, 28 million people, instead of doing that, he requires you to shed the blood of man. No. There are entities at play. I believe that. I do. And I believe that this angel that we saw today is an entity. And that entity who lives in the place where they sacrificed a chunk of themselves and piled it into a hill. And then named the place after it, where it becomes a center of power, where they return to refresh, where they are supported from by the entity. Lets you know what entity you're dealing with. And you don't think that maybe when we just saw Jericho being taken, that it was because of this spot, and when we saw this guy die at Gilgal, that is not a recommitment from Israel to this entity? That's what this is. And if that steps on your toes, I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry for saying it. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me. And I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. And you are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. This has been Pitts D. Peace.